Hello everyone, our topic is Communicative Language Teaching Approach. And our team members are me, Evelyn Samayoa, Fabiola González, Gabriela Ramos, Mónica Barahona, and Tatiana Martir. So let's begin. What is CLT? It is an approach to the teaching of second and foreign languages that emphasizes interaction as both the means and the ultimate goal of learning a language. The communicative approach could be said to be the product of educators and linguists who had grown dissatisfied with the audiolingual and grammar translation methods of foreign language instructions. This method aims at developing procedures for the teaching of the four skills that acknowledge the interdependence of language and communication. It also aims at having students become communicatively competent. A set of principles about teaching, including recommendations about method and syllabus, where the focus is on meaningful communication, not a structure, use, not usage. In this approach, students are given tasks to accomplish using language instead of studying the language. The goals of language teaching. Communicative language teaching sets at its goal the teaching of communicative competence. But what does this term mean? Perhaps we can clarify this term by first comparing it with the concept of grammatical competence. Grammatical competence refers to the knowledge we have of a language that accounts for our ability to produce sentences in a language. It also refers to knowledge of the building blocks of sentences and how sentences are formed. Examples of building blocks of sentences could be parts of speech, tenses, phrases, clauses, and sentence patterns. It also focuses on many grammar practice books, which typically present a rule of grammar on one page and provide exercises to practice using the rule on the other page. The unit of analysis and practice is typically the sentence. So, while grammatical competence is an important dimension of language learning, it is clearly not all that is involved in learning a language, since one can master the rules of sentences formation in a language and still not very successful at being able to use the language for meaningful communication. On the other hand, communicative competence includes the following aspects of language knowledge, which are knowing how to use language for a range of different purposes and functions, knowing how to vary our use of language according to the setting and the participants. For example, knowing when to use formal and informal speech, or when to use language appropriately for written as opposed to spoken communication. The second one is knowing how to produce and understand different types of text. For example, narratives, reports, interviews, or conversations. Also, knowing how to maintain communication despite having limitation in one's language knowledge. For example, through using different kinds of communication strategies. And the advantages of the CLT. The CLT it is much more pupil-oriented because it is based on pupils' needs and interests. It also seeks to personalize and localize language and adapt it to interests of pupils. Meaningful language is always more easily retained by learners. It also seeks to use authentic resources and it is more interesting and motivating for children. And children can acquire grammar rules as a necessity to speak so it's more proficient and efficient.
Hello, Today, I'm going to talk about the CLT and the basic concept. I will share my screen with you and I will show you something, all right? The basic concepts. Here we have three methods. The ones are the approach, the design, and also the procedure. The approach refers to theories about the nature of language and language learning that serve as a resource of practice and principles of language teaching. You will know about it because my one of my classmates will talk to you about it, right? About the theories. And keep it in mind because this will be really important, very essential. uh, And the design specif- specifies the relationship theories of language and learning to the selection and the organization of language content, to the types of tasks and learning activities, and the role of the learners, teachers, and also the materials. And now talking about the procedure, we have here we have the procedure comprise the classroom, right? And the techniques and practices that are consequences of particular approach and the designs. And here we have the CLT. I will talk with you about the approach, the design, and the procedure. The CLT at the level of approach, the CLT at the level of design, the CLT at the level of procedure, right? And now I will show you that, right? The CLT at the level of approach. And here we have the nature of language, the nature of learning a language, and the activities that involve real communication promote learning. The language that is meaningful to the learner supports the learning process. Process, sorry. The CLT at the level of design. The goal of language teaching. It's knowledge of the grammar, the vocabulary, the phonology, and semantics of the language, and the knowledge of how to begin and end conversations, the knowledge of some strategies to compensate other weak areas. And here we have the syllabus, the grammar base, the skill bases that are the listening, speaking, writing, and also reading, right? The functions base discover the difference and solve the problems. Some task base are like discover the difference and solve some problems. And the CLT at the level of the procedure. And here we have the types of activities, the fluency, the information gaps, the role plays, the opinion sharing, and also we have to focus on the formation of correct examples of the language. We have the practice language out, out of context. We have the practice small samples of language, as I mentioned before, the fluency, they reflect natural use of language and require the use of communication strategy. This is really important, and we have to know that are some characteristics at the level of some things that are more important than others, right? Like some role plays, like activities, right? As I mentioned before, role plays, opinion sharing, gaps, and that, right? It's important to know how to begin and how to end some conversations, the fluency, how to improve our skills. It's really important and it's what we have to keep in mind and keeping going, right? We have to always improve, we have to always be better, and that's all for me. Thank you.
Hello, teacher and classmates. My name is Gabriela Ramos, and today I'm going to talk to you about the characteristics of communicative language teaching. So let's start with the first one that says CLT emphasizes to engage the learners in real life situations in the classroom so that they can understand how to communicate in the real world. But okay, let's talk about this. Communicative language teaching is an approach which provides the opportunity to the learners to communicate in their target language. Um, they can be able to communicate in the target language day by day. The activities that you can use in these situations are dramas, role plays, games, um, popcorn, and something like that. Because you as a teacher have to make this learning process enjoyable. Let's talk about the number two, and it says, it gives the importance of the necessity of the learners and attempts to explain it. Okay, so what do you have to do to appeal to your learners? You have to excite them, you have to intrigue them, you have to provide solutions to their problems, and most importantly, you have to convince them that your solutions will change their lives forever. For better, sorry. Okay. The number three says, in communicative language teaching, errors are considered in a natural phenomenon. Okay, let's talk about errors. Errors have been regarded as a natural phenomenon in the process of learning English. Practicing too much error correction is, however, considered as a way of discouraging students from speaking the language. Here you have a beautiful quote by Bob Ross, and it says, as long as you are learning, you are not failing. Remember that you as a teacher have to encourage your students to be better. Okay, let's start with number four, and it says, normally CLT focuses on the fluency of the learners rather than the accuracy of the grammar, and learners acquire their accuracy gradually and naturally. Okay, remember that this is a process. And we know that a child learns language naturally, almost like a miracle, as their language acquisition is rapidly developed with, with some important things. But unfortunately, when it comes adult students, you have to be patient since they are like babies and they learn by listening and repeating, repeating what they heard, but is a slower way. Okay, let's talk about the number five, and it says CTL also believes that communication is the fundamental objectives of the language. Okay, the goal of learning language is to communicate. Oral communication skills are fundamental to the development of oral literacy and essential for thinking and learning. It's like the glue that puts all the components of a language together. Now, and finally, let's talk about the number six. And it says, it offers the opportunity to join in teacher-learner and learner-learner interaction in the classroom. First, we are going to talk about learner-learner. This type of interaction happens between two learners or among a group of learners that are studying the same course. This can happen with or without the teacher or the instructor. Now, let's talk about teacher-learner. This type of interaction happens when the teacher delivers information or provides feedback to their students. It also takes place when learners ask the instructor questions or communicate with him or her regarding the course. So that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Hello guys, I hope that you are fine, and now I'm going to continue with the approach of the communicative language teaching, which comprises two important theories. And let's see. The communicative approach in language teaching starts from a theory of language as communication. And as we can see here, the Hathaway Himes, who was a sociolinguistic, says that the goal of language teaching is to develop the communicative competence. And also he comes this term in order to contrast a communicative view of language and also Chomsky's theory of competence. And here we have that Chomsky has that linguistic theory is concerned primarily with an ideal speaker-listener in a completely homogeneous speech community, who knows its language perfectly and is unaffected by such grammatically irrelevant conditions as memory limitation, distractions, and shifts of attention and interest, and errors in applying his knowledge of the language in actual performance. So, for Chomsky, the focus of linguistic theory was to characterize that abstract abilities that a speaker possesses that enables them to produce grammatically correct sentences in a language. And also, Himes held that such a view of linguistic theory was sterile, that linguistic theory needed to be seen as part of a more general theory in computer communication and also culture. So now, a Ham's theory of communicative competence was a definition of what a speaker needs to know in order to be communicatively competent in a speech community. So in Ham's view, a person who acquires communicative competence acquires both knowledge also ability for language use respect to, and now here we have the whether something is formally possible and also whether something is feasible in virtue of the means of implementation available, and also whether something is appropriate, adequate, happy, successful in relation to a context in which it is used and evaluated. Also, whether something is in fact done, actually performed, and what it's doing entails. So, this theory of what knowing a language entails offers a much more comprehensive view than Chomsky view of competence, which deals primarily with abstract grammatical knowledge. So, uh, another linguistic theory of communication favored in communicative language teaching is Michael's functional account of language use. And Michael Halliday says that linguistics is concerned with the description of a speech, acts of text, since only through the study of language in use are all the functions of language, and therefore all components of meaning brought into focus. So, also Halliday has elaborated a powerful theory of the functions of language, which complements Haim's view of communicative competence for many writers on communicative language teaching. And also, he described the seven basic functions that language performs for children learning their first language. And here we have the first one, the instrumental function, and for example, using language to get things. The second one, the regulatory function, for example, using language to control the behavior of others. And number three, the interactional function, for example, using language to create interaction with others. The number four, the personal function, for example, using a language to express personal feelings and also meanings. And the number five, the heuristic function, for example, using language to learn and to discover. The number six, the imaginative function, for example, using language to create a world of the imagination. And the number seven, the representational function, for example, using language to communicate information. And now let's move to the communicative competence. And let me tell you that a more recent analysis of communicative competence is found in Canal and Swine, in which 4 dimensions of communicative competence are identified. And as you can see here, we have the discourse competence, the grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, and also a strategic competence. And with the first one, the grammatical competence is the domain of grammatical and lexical capacity. And also the sociolinguistic competence refers to an understanding of the social context in which a communication takes place, including role relationship, the shared information of the participant, and also the communicative purpose for their interaction. With the discourse competence, it refers to the interpretation of individual message elements in terms of their interconnectedness and how meaning is represented in relationship to the entire discourse or any text. And the last one, which is a strategic competence, refers to a coping strategies that communicators employ to initiate, terminate, maintain, and also repair communication. And now let's move to the theory of learning. And with theory of learning, elements of an underlying learning theory can be discerned in some communicative language teaching practices. One such element might be described as the communication principle. And for example, activities that involve real communication promote learning. And a second element is the task principle. For example, activities in which language is used for carrying out meaningful tasks promote learning, and a third element is the mindfulness principle language that is meaningful to the learning supports the learning process. And communicative language teaching have attempted to describe theories of language learning processes that are compatible with the communicative approach. And here we have the Sabinan surveys a second language acquisition research assessor for learning theories and considers the role of linguistic, social, cognitive, and individual variables in language acquisition. And also here we have the crashing sees the acquisition as the basic process involved in developing language proficiency and distinguishes this process from learning. And also let me tell you that acquisition refers to the unconscious development of the target language uh, and as a result of using the language for real communication. And also learning is the conscious representation of grammatical knowledge that has resulted from instruction and it cannot be led to the acquisition. And now, to conclude, as a brief summary of this part, communicative language teaching is an approach which provides opportunity to the learners to communicative in the target language. So my classmate is going to continue.
To continue with the topic, we are going to talk about classroom activities in communicative language teaching. First of all, we are going to talk about the syllables. Communicative language teaching syllables organize the teaching according to the notional and functional categories of language rather than according to its structures. Because the main goal of the communicative language teaching is to develop the fluency in language use. Fluency is natural language use occurring when a speaker engages in meaningful interaction and maintains the comprehensible and ongoing communication despite his or her communicative competence. The syllables concentrates on the following. First, the interactions using the language to communicate, then task using language to perform meaningful tasks, and learner putting the learner's interest needs in the forefront. That means that the teachers are going to prioritize their students' needs. Then we have accuracy versus fluency activities. Fluency is developed by creating classroom activities in which students must negotiate meaning, use communication strategies, correct misunderstandings, and work to avoid communication breakdowns. In accuracy, it focuses on creating correct examples of language use. The differences in activities are those ones. The activities focusing on fluency reflect natural use of language, focus on achieving communication, require meaningful use of language, require the use of communication strategies, produce language that may not be predictable, and seek to link language use to context. And activities focusing on accuracy reflect classroom use of language, focus on the formation of correct examples of language, practice language out of the context, Practice small samples of language and do not require meaningful communication and controlled choice of language. That means that the activities focusing on fluency let students to improvise while they are doing some activities, like for example making a dialogue. It's important to say that the use of both kind of activities permit or let teachers to handle the information in a better way, because they can use both kind of activities to improve their students speaking skills or their students communication skills. Then we have the activities. We have role plays, practice dialogue, pair work, interviews, information gap, opinion sharing activities. Those are activities that are must used in communicative language teaching. First, we have role plays. Role plays is an oral activity in which the goal is to develop students' communicative abilities. Abilities in a certain situation. For example, the teacher can give a group of students a situation in which they have to create their own dialogues. For example, a collision between two cars. There will be the police officer, the drivers, the witness, and they have to create a dialogue with the information or with the vocabulary they had. Then we have practice dialogue. That is a practice that is already given from the teacher to the students, so they can practice as well, but not as free as they can do in a role play. Then we have peer work. That is almost the same as a group work. That means that they have to work in groups or in pairs in order to share information with each other and to practice their communication skills. Then we have interviews. The interviews are also oral and sometimes writing activities in which they have to divide into the one that is going to ask the questions and the other one that is going to answer the questions. They are going to share information and they are going to practice at the same time. And then they can change the things that they were doing. For example, the other one can ask and the other one can answer. Then we have information gap. Information gap is it's also an oral activity which purpose is for students to obtain information that is unknown. That means that they are going to look for new information. For example, they can have a table in which they have certain information and the other group have all the other half of information. So they have to communicate in order to exchange the information that each one have. So that is a good activity because they exchange information that they didn't know before. That means that this is a good activity because it's because that activity is related with the real world communication, because it's what we basically do in everyday life, because we ask to obtain new information. Then we have opinion sharing activities. That those are activities in which they share their opinions and then they can practice their communicative skills. Now we're going to talk about teacher and learners roles in the classroom. A teacher's role. The type of classroom activities proposed in CLT or communicative language teaching also imply new roles in the classroom for teachers and for learners. Teachers now have to assume the role of facilitator and monitor. Teachers are the facilitators of the learning process. They monitor the learning process, and the teachers are also active participants of the communicative process. Teachers are the one that have to facilitate the information to the students, and they have to look for a way in which students can understand better. They also monitor when they are doing the activities, because they have to catch the errors or the mistakes that the students made. But it's important that they don't interrupt while they doing the learning process, while doing the activities, because they have to do that after. And then we have the learners role. Learners now have to participate in classroom activities that were based on a cooperative rather than individualistic approach to learning. That means that in communicative language teaching, they work most of the time in pairs or in groups, because they have to exchange information. They have to practice their communicative skills. Learners participate in the communication process actively. They have responsibility for their own learning, and they cooperate with their group. Learners have to participate in the activities because they have to practice their skills, their communication skills, and they have the responsibility for their own learning, because they can work at their own pace, and they have to look for more vocabulary or for more information in order to complete those activities. And they have to work in group, because as I said before, in communicative language teaching, they most of the time they work in groups. Now we're going to talk about problems with communicative language teaching. We have here one problem, that is adaptation problem. And if the teacher understands the student, they have good communication. But if they don't understand, there is a problem. For example, if the teacher is from the same region as the student, the teacher will understand the mistakes or the errors that the student makes during the learning process. But with a native speaker teacher, for example, it will be great difficult for them to understand the errors, because they are not used to know the language that they really speak. That errors resulting from first language influence. As we know, we make a lot of mistakes because we relate English with Spanish, and that is something that is not good, because they are not the same. So if the teacher is from the same region as we are, they will understand our errors, but if they are native speakers, they won't understand. So that is a problem that it can happen with communicative language teaching. And that's all for the topic, and I hope you have learned a little bit about the communicative language teaching.